So today I'm going to be doing kind of a different video. It's not like the ones I usually do. So I do this thing at school called the EPQ, the Extended Product Qualification, and I have to give a presentation about a topic I've done a lot of research on, and I'm kind of practicing for it. Usually I wouldn't have all these notes. This is the first time I'm actually trying the presentation, and yeah, I will link either at in the description of this video or at the end the actual a video with the actual style presentation, except I won't have any visual aids because I don't have a screen. But I will be using cue cards instead of my phone notes. But yes, this is my practice run. It's going to obviously include some history, but it's going to be a lot very evaluative. It's not going to be just detailing facts. I'm going to be mentioning how I researched, what went well, what went wrong, and how relevant this specific topic is to today, and especially to me. Well, let's start. My EPQ question was, to what extent did the personal appeal of Lenin lead to the collapse of the Tsarist regime? And so first of all, I need to talk about the debate itself. Well, first of all, like I said, the personal appeal of Lenin. It is significant, and it is widely accepted that Lenin, with this personal appeal, was the main cause of the collapse of the Tsarist regime. This is partly due to the idea of great man history. Well, one can't really ignore how unpopular Tsar Nicholas II was, so could this unpopularity be the main cause of the collapse of the Tsarist regime and his own downfall? Or could it also be that the rise of Marxism was really popular, it was really coming about, and Lenin used these Marxist ideas to gain popularity? So was it this instead of the dislike of the Tsar and the personal appeal of Lenin? And that is what I'm debating what I'm arguing in this dissertation. And I mentioned the idea of great man history, which is partly why everyone thinks that it was Lenin. And it's because it's this idea that a strong leading figure has to be there at the forefront of something great to happen. A great man has to lead. And without this great man, certain events cannot happen. Now, this theory can be true. It can also not be true, and that's what I'm debating. I am debating that it wasn't Lenin, but it was the promises and the ideas he used, not his own personal appeal. So before I get into the actual dissertation, I have to talk about how I researched. And I used several methods. First of all, using books, which was one of the first methods of research I actually used. Under recommendation from my TA, I bought this textbook, which included a wide range of sources and first information I could start off from. So it included a summary of the route to communism, included biographies on leading politicians, and it just a bit of background. It was great. And from then on, I went on researching and found other books I do believe proved really useful for my dissertation. Then I also used websites. So it was the main source of information because it was readily available, and for reasons I'm going to get into in a second, it was basically the only thing I could really use. And I tried to use those that were really reliable and really trustworthy. And for that reason, I rely quite heavily on Britannica.com and History.com. I also use TV shows. So multimedia, it can't really be ignored nowadays. We live in a society where it's not only books and websites that we can get information from. Videos, TV shows, movies. And these were not only, obviously, for research, these were to also, they were interesting and fun, and I really liked them. So they were backed by historical, historians and backed by historical research, and I used those for my research. Although I did kind of know some of them, like the events were dramatized, and they weren't really 100% reliable, but I still used them. And then I actually used YouTube videos. Now, these weren't my main source of research by any means. I did use one on Joseph Stalin to get a biography, But the others I use, and these are listed in my bibliography, well, I used them after I finished the dissertation, and it was not only to consolidate my research to make sure I had everything, also to had if they mentioned something that I missed out, well, I would note that down and see if I could add it. And that was the way I used teacher videos. They weren't the main source of research. I mainly used it when I was finishing. Then, well, nobody's perfect. Some things went well, some things went wrong, and I'm going to get into that now. So first of all, what went well? Well, the EPQ, my dissertation, ended up being exactly what I wanted. When I first got into the project, I envisioned this heavily researched dissertation full of facts and analysis, and this long piece of work that had many hours of research behind it, and it was well written. And I do believe that was my final product. I'm really happy with how it turned out, because I know it's not only because it's long, because I put a lot of work into it. Everything there is heavily researched, and it's literally the idea I had of a historical dissertation. Then I do believe I organized myself quite effectively. We had an activity log, which I added to weekly, as well as a research log to keep track of everything I used for like websites, books, TV shows, and I did the literature review, and like a lot of my friends, or like from a lot of people I know, left it kind of till the end, but I personally did it as I went along. So as I used the website, I wrote it in my literature review, and that's why when it came to actually writing it, I didn't have to. I did do some changes, but no, I had to rewrite it because it was already there. And fun fact, once I was like making sure I had the footnotes perfectly, so I went checking them one by one, and there was this one specific website which when I clicked, it said it was no longer available for EU countries. Turns out it was a British website that had been since blocked in the EU. Now, when I researched and when I got my knowledge, I got a lot of information, well, not a lot, but a piece of information from that website, and luckily I noted the date of access, so even though it's not available anymore, it was when I used it, so that proved to be kind of useful. Then I also, something that went really well and was really useful later on was me learning research skills. So before I just looked at a website and just believed everything. Now this taught me how to be more analytical and how to see if this source, this website, this book is valuable, and how to condense that information and pick the things I need out. And this proved to be not only useful for the EPQ, but also for my A-level coursework for history. We had to write a piece of coursework, and I needed to do research, same as with the EPQ, and this really helped. And something which also helped in the coursework was me learning referencing skills. I knew from the EPQ how to structure bibliography, how to structure footnotes, which honestly saved a lot of time with the coursework, not with the EPQ, because I was learning that as I went along, but that went really well because I could use it in the coursework. And also I learned new ways on how to prevent plagiarism. When I started the project, I was terrified of it. I didn't really know how to stop, but then I met with my TA, and she told me like how to do a table that separated like my initial ideas and then my ideas after research, and then I could compare how they differed and see which areas needed more referencing. And they taught me new ways to stop me accidentally plagiarizing, and that really helped with the coursework. And I do believe I referenced everything correctly, so that went really well. Another thing that went amazingly well, which I did not expect, was the structuring process. I went through a very long structuring process because at first it was horrible. It was narrative, and because I said I need to like divide my points and make it analytical. So I added headers so I could have my points ordered. Then I added a sentence at the beginning of each paragraph under each header saying that introducing the paragraph and making it to be more analytical, kind of answering the question. Then at the end of each paragraph, I added a last sentence, linking it back to the question and turning it into more analytical and comparing it to other factors. And then I removed the headers, and that ended up being a dissertation. By the time I had done all that, it was, like a long essay with an analytical nature. And this was really, really useful. And I do not think I could have done that from the beginning. Obviously, I went through this process, and the end result was really good, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. Now, obviously, like I said, I wasn't perfect. Some things did go wrong, and I could have improved so many other things, which I'm going to get into now. Like I mentioned before, I mainly use websites, and one of the main reasons why this happened was because of COVID. There was a lockdown right in the middle of when I was supposed to do my research, so I couldn't exactly go into public libraries, into archives, into the school library, and get books there. So I had to rely on websites. It's one of the main reasons, because I could have gone to a school website, has a lot of books on Russia, public websites, and the archives. That could have been great, but because some things out of my control, I couldn't. So I did rely a lot on websites. I tried to use them the best I could, and I did use books, but I could have used more. Then the sources I used, the majority, if not all of them, come from Western capitalist countries in English. Now, these tend to have a negative view of communism and of those who established communism in Russia, so Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin. So these would obviously be quite negative towards them. If I was able to speak Russian and look at Russian sources, there is a huge chance my EPQ angle would be kind of different, because they would have a different point of view. And my language, there was a language barrier there, and it's out of my control because I don't know how to speak Russian. So that could have gone better, but I think I did quite well with what was available to me. But oh well. Then another thing that could have gone better, which again wasn't really in my control, was because all of these sources were written after Stalin. Now, Stalin had this brutal dictatorship in Russia, and this really damaged the idea of the premier of the Soviet Union, with many thinking that Lenin had actually laid the foundations to this dictatorship. This is not exactly true, and thus leads to a more negative view of Lenin. Like I said, if some sources are from between I think I used one book that's around the beginning of the Stalin dictatorship, but most of them are from nowadays, and well, it doesn't paint Lenin in a brilliant light. And one thing that was in my control that went wrong was landing on the question and then the time frame of said question. When I first started the EPQ, I had the idea of doing a question on the butterfly effect in history, and how did the assassination of Franz Ferdinand lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union. I had a meeting with my TA, and we decided that question, it was way too broad and not that analytical. It would turn out to be really, really narrative. Then we narrowed it down to, instead of Soviet Union, the collapse of the Tsarist regime, and instead of the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the appeal of Lenin. That took time, but we got that. That was all good. Then came the time frame, and that was kind of hard, because I thought there's two ways I can do this. I can do this until 1917, when the Bolshevik Revolution happened, or until 1922, the establishment of the Soviet Union, which firmly established Lenin as the leader of Russia. So which one do I do? I did a meeting with my TA, and we decided that I would do two plans. I did them, and I had 3 points for each. These are my 3 chapters of the EPQ, and I realized that my points would be a lot stronger if I did up until 1917 rather than up until 1922. It would be more concise, and I could put a lot more factual knowledge and analysis, because in the other one there would be a broader time period. And that took a lot of time to actually land on that time frame. I wasted a lot of time doing the planning. Well, not wasted, but I spent a lot of time doing the planning for the 1922 question. So well, that I could use that time to do more research, to start writing before. So yeah, that was a lot of time wasted. Now sometimes I try to be as analytical as possible, but with a history essay, you always run the risk of being too narrative, and I still do that in my A level, but within the EPQ, it happens, and I try to be as analytical as possible. I did the best I could, but some parts are kind of too narrative, and that could have gone better. And like I mentioned with the structuring process, at first it was way too narrative, and I managed to shorten things and make it more analytical. And also another thing is that I sometimes rely too heavily on some websites. I mentioned I relied on reliable websites like history.com and britannica.com, but if you look at my bibliography, I do use Britannica so much. And one thing that could have gone better is relying on other websites. So yeah, that is things I went wrong. I mean, the EPQ, I do think went quite well, but obviously some things didn't go to plan. And now is the question, what would I do differently? If I had to change the way I studied EPQ, if I had to start all over again, what would I do? Well, first of all, I would try and use more books. Of course, if I could do it now, there are still some COVID restrictions, but less. And maybe years into the future, if I should do the dissertation again, I would be able to use not websites, obviously, but archives, libraries. If it is with actual physical books, that could prove more useful to my research than websites, because these books are supposedly reviewed prior to publishing, but a website can be published by literally anyone. A book has to go through review, so they should be in theory more reliable. Another thing I would do differently, and this is relating to this, is using different types of websites. Rather than relying so heavily on Britannica.com and History.com, using a wide range. Still reliable. I wouldn't go to the fourth page of Google and just click on a random one, but still I could use more like other websites, a different range, rather than just relying so heavily on those two. And another thing I would definitely change, and this is one of the things I would do another dissertation, I would definitely do this, is referencing while I go along. So as I was researching, I did write all the sources, I did put everything there, but I didn't use the proper referencing format. I did this at the end. This was really time consuming. I spent around 2 days doing 2 to 3 days doing the referencing. I mean, I didn't do it non-stop, but I just heavily referencing, putting it in the proper format, doing the footnotes, bibliography, and that took a long time. And I did start to do it properly at first, but it was kind of confusing for me. I don't know, I got distracted and I decided to do this like this way. But I think I probably should have stuck with that, because I would have gotten used to it, and it would have saved me a lot of time further down the road, because the final 3 days of my EPQ were just adding references and adding footnotes. And like sometimes there was this thing that there's like this sentence that I know is referenced, but I didn't write it down at the time, so I had to go back to my research and find that thing and reference it back, and that took ages. So I would do that differently. And now to the actual, I'm going to get into the actual dissertation. So, well, before I get into the actual arguments, you need to understand a bit of historical background. Well, all this happened in 1917, but there was this Russian Revolution in 1905. This boy, Nicholas II, he was really, really popular, had even earned the nickname Nicholas the Bloody, and there was this revolution, and there was a lot of prominent political figures assassinated, riots, strikes, and some leading Bolsheviks, some leading Marxists would appear, like Leon Trotsky. This happened because of Russia's unexpected defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, making the Tsar, the country, even more unpopular, and people realizing that the democratic, the style of government wasn't working, and they wanted a more democratic one. They did end up getting the Duma, which formed the basis of the later be known the provisional government, and it was really weak, but it was a reform. It was a change in the style of Russian government, so it showed how the Tsar wasn't really, he wasn't untouchable. And that is a bit of the background. So I'm gonna talk about my dissertation now. I'm not gonna really get into the arguments because that's the dissertation, but I'm just gonna give a brief overview. So first of all, if I'm arguing the personal appeal of Lenin, I have to talk about his background. And Lenin had a really relatable background. He was really accessible. He came from the middle class, was very well educated, and ended up studying law and reading Marxist books at university. And he was really well read, really educated, and that really helped him become more relatable. He could speak to the people, was an amazing public speaker. So his own personality and personal background really made him popular. Then he founded the Bolshevik Party, which is a huge part of his personal appeal because it did act as a vessel through which he could talk. He could get into power, and that's what he used with the Bolshevik Party. Was Lenin's creation. It was under another political party, but that's not it was Lenin's creation. The Bolshevik Party was Lenin's, and he used it to give his opinions, to make him appear to the public, to just portray himself put himself out there. Then his personal appeal is one thing. His background is something, but part of his personal appeal is his promises. Well, if the April thesis, peace, land, and bread, no other politician promised this. No one in the provisional government said this. He even advocated stuff like this even before the Tsar was overthrown. So that's a bit why not all politicians not promising this? This guy is, let's like him, and that's part of his a huge part of his personal appeal. This personal appeal can be measured because it wasn't just popular in Russia; it was popular in other countries. So, for example, in Britain, some thought he was threatening democracy, others thought he was saving it. And I mean, how do you know where someone has a huge personal appeal? Well, if other countries take notice. And in Germany, it just shows how popular Lenin was and how it was his personal appeal that led to his rise to power and the collapse of the Tsarist regime. Well, the Kaiser was now a supporter of Lenin and ended up convincing the Kaiser to give money for Alexander Parvus to give money to Lenin through the use of his personal appeal and propaganda. Leninist propaganda. And these are all huge factors that contribute to his personal appeal and made him out there. But it's not the most important factor because there's the dislike of the Tsar that really contributed to the collapse of the Tsarist regime and the appeal of Marxism. So I'm going to get into that just now. Well, first of all, Tsar Nicholas himself, he wasn't confident in himself. He wasn't strong. He wasn't a prominent political figure like Alexander II or Alexander III had been. He was seen weak. He was seen under the influence of his ministers, and also to blame for everything. Nicholas the Bloody. It's just his image wasn't as a strong leader, and he was pretty as weak, like I said. Then Rasputin. Well, Rasputin had a huge influence in the Tsarina, and this was all because the Tsar and Tsarina had struggled to have a male heir. They had a bunch of daughters, but finally when the son, Alexei, came, Tsarevich, I don't know how to pronounce that. I think it's Tsarevich, but I'm not sure. He was born, and he had hemophilia, and a lot of doctors couldn't stop it. Here comes this guy, this priest, this monk, and cured, supposedly, the Tsarevich. And that gained a lot of influence, and this epitomized in World War One. Well, Russia lost, but before it was Lenin who actually signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the end of the war, the end of Russia's participation in the war. Well, actually, the war was pretty much lost before then. The Tsar made a personal appearance in the front lines, but left Russia to go to the front lines in 1915, and that just made him to be like, oh, he's the guy to blame. He's there. Everything is going wrong because of him. And what didn't help is that at home, back in Russia, Alexandra, the Tsarina, she had been left in charge. She had been left there to rule Russia, and was Rasputin, leading to very poor choice of ministers, further decreasing the image of Tsarism and the Tsarist regime. Now, I did mention how other European countries saw Lenin, and here's how other European countries saw the Tsar. Well, France, who was supposedly their ally, saw him, a diplomat, called the Tsar a lunatic. And then Germany's the Kaiser called the Tsar weak, even though they were cousins. And yeah, this is all great. I mean, these all contributed to the decrease of the image of the Tsar and, dislike, but it wasn't the main cause, because yeah, every government has unpopularity, but is it enough to cause the collapse of this 300-year-old regime? And here comes the main factor, and what I personally believe, and what I argue in my dissertation, that caused the actual collapse of the Tsarist regime, and that is the appeal of Marxism. Well, this can be divided into several sections. Firstly, with Georgy Valentinovich Plekhanov. He was the first person to bring Marxism to Russia. He founded the first political party, and he inspired Lenin. Even though for long in life they would disagree, without Plekhanov, Lenin would have never had the opportunity to create the Bolshevik Party. So part of his appeal, part of the way Lenin used the Bolshevik Party to put his personal appeal across, it was because this guy had done it first. Then there were other prominent Russian political leaders who were like Marxists, also were really, really, really prominent, like Joseph Stalin, he was really prominent and was in Russia actually before Lenin when it came to the collapse of the Tsarist regime. However, he was working under the shadow of Lenin. He was less opportunistic. He would turn out to be, but in 1917, he admired Lenin. And yeah, Lenin's personal appeal overshadowed that of Stalin's, but Stalin did bring a lot of ideas into the Bolshevik Party, so he can be credited with some of his success. And that is Marx's ideas rather than Lenin. Then Trotsky, he had the Menshevik wing of the Russian political party where the Bolsheviks came from, and they were more radical, and they were quite popular, almost as popular as the Bolsheviks. But like Stalin, Trotsky kind of fell under Lenin's wing, and he wasn't as opportunistic. He was one of the leading figures in the 1905 revolution, but Lenin overshadowed him. But he also brought forth ideas that helped Lenin. Without Trotsky, there would have been no Lenin. Personally, I think, because Trotsky and his revolution and his radical ideas and desire for change kind of inspired Lenin, even though he was Trotsky eventually fell under Lenin's wing. Then another thing that shows how prominent Marxism was in Russia, and it wasn't Lenin, it was Marxism, was the creation of the Social Revolutionary Party in Russia, which was very, very popular, even more than the Bolsheviks. They actually, in the elections conducted in 1917, they actually were more popular than the Bolsheviks. They had more votes, even though the Bolsheviks were supposedly in power. But there were divisions in the party, and some were more radical, some weren't, and that caused more people to vote for the Bolsheviks. Were more organized. But had they been more organized, more put together, they would have trumped over the Lenin and his Bolsheviks. And the main reason why, personally, I think it's the appeal of Marxism rather than the appeal of Lenin is because it provided a huge contrast to the autocracy. Russia had been living in this autocratic regime for 300 years, and well, 3/4 of people in Petrograd, modern day St. Petersburg, well, they were peasants simply by birth. Part of Lenin's appeal, like I mentioned, his promises, peace, land, and bread, the April thesis, these were Marxist ideas. These are extreme left-wing ideas that really appeal people, and it's this appeal of Marxism and these ideas that Lenin used. The structure Lenin used to get to power is exactly the left-wing idea of a second revolution. Exactly that. And Lenin, first of all, Lenin wasn't even there in Russia when the Tsar was overthrown. He wasn't even there. His ideas were kind of there, but not really. It was the provisional government who overthrew the Tsar. And these were left-wing politicians. Lenin was just opportunistic and managed to take control of Russia, but it wasn't Lenin. It was Marxist ideas. So that is the actual dissertation. And now here comes the overall judgment. Well, Lenin was important. You really can't deny that. He was this exemplary leader, and the Bolshevik party was his, but he was simply opportunistic. He knew when to act, and he knew how to bend people to his will, not bend them to his will, but tell them what they want to hear. And that is part of his personal appeal, but what they wanted to hear were Marxist ideas. The conditions were perfect for revolution, and the poverty had made the left more popular because in times of crisis and war, people tend to go to extremes. Now, Tsarist regime had been more right-wing leaning, if you think about it, more autocratic. So they just went to the polar opposite, extreme left. Well, the Tsar had really messed up the country with poor choice of ministers, a weak personality, and this feudal-style government that was a remnant of the Middle Ages. But it wasn't the Tsar who actually caused his own downfall, because, well, this can be shown in this brutal assassination. It was hatred towards him, not towards the Tsarist regime. If he had been it was just hatred towards the regime, he probably would have been deposed, and either Alexei the Tsarevich could have been allowed to rule, or simply the family could have sought refuge in another country, or be left to live in the countryside or whatever, losing power but still remaining alive. The way they were brutally assassinated just shows how it was hatred towards Tsar Nicholas and his family and the Romanovs rather than the whole Tsarist regime. And like I said, it just shows how Marxism was more important than anything. The left provided equality, something that was really sought after by those who were really poor. It was a direct contrast to the Tsarist regime, like I mentioned, a direct contrast to autocracy. It was what Lenin used to gain popularity, and Trotsky and Stalin also gained popularity, just Lenin was more opportunistic. He had a more imposing popularity, but the ideas he used to gain power were Marxist ideas, just like Stalin and Trotsky. And the only reason, like I said, is just because he was opportunistic. And yeah, that is the argument. Now, before I wrap this up, I'm going to talk about how relevant this is to me and to history and to society. Well, first of all, to me personally, I want to study history at university. I applied and I've got this one. I have a few offers for pure history, and this is because when I was doing this dissertation topic, I was actually debating on whether to study veterinary science and history. I know, two polar opposites, but I enjoyed this dissertation so much that I was really happy writing it, and anyone who knows me can tell you that I had a lot of fun researching and then writing it up and turning the essay into something more analytical. It just made me realize that's what I want to do with my life, and it pushed me towards history rather than to the veterinary science. And again, it just shows that I want a career in this. So to do that, I need to study history at university. Well, like I mentioned, I want a career in I don't know if in academia, but in something to do with historical investigation. Maybe academia, maybe teaching history, maybe doing historical documentaries, I don't know. But definitely something involving investigation and research. Because I love this EPQ so much, I want to continue doing it. And that's why it's relevant to me. But this topic specifically is really relevant in today's society. I love history so much. One of the reasons I do is because it provides a parallel. I mean, everyone says this, but it does provide a parallel between current events and past historical events. And one of the really clear ones that is extremely relevant is Trump. And here's why. Donald Trump was impeached for the second time on January 13th, 2021, with the previous impeachment occurring on December 18th, 2019. Now, this occurred because of short-term and long-term factors. The short-term being Trump's political ideology, in the most recent impeachment, because he was an incitement of the Capitol, of the riots, and when they broke into the Capitol. But long-term factors were because of the general dissatisfaction left by the Obama administration. This really sounds like, in the debate I mentioned, the Lenin one, short-term factors were Lenin's political ideology and how he was opportunistic and how he could take advantage and use the Bolshevik party to gain power. But long-term factors were the dissatisfaction left by the Tsarist regime. It's really similar, and it provides an insight into how we have to differentiate between long-term and short-term factors and analyze them, see how relevant they are, how significant they are. And it's this exact reason why one of the reasons I chose this topic, why I ended up doing this. I mean, when I started, the Trump second impeachment hadn't occurred, but the first one had. And yeah, it's really relevant because it provides a parallel with current debates that are really, really important in today's society. So yeah, that is my EPQ presentation. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to leave a link either in a few seconds. It's in a little box on the screen, or on the description. That is me with the cue cards rather than the notes, because those are detailed notes. The cue cards are just headings. This is way longer than it should be, and it's because I elaborate to give. And I went over too much, and it does make me realize that I really need to shorten this, and that's one of the reasons I recorded this video instead of doing a normal historical research topic. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and please give me feedback if you want to go watch the other video. That would be super helpful, because I have my EPQ presentation in a few days, and I really appreciate all the help I can get. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Bye!